I am Leda Pérez. I am an associate professor at the Universidad del Pacífico in Lima, Peru, and I have had the great pleasure of spending the last 5 months teaching here at Sciences Po. I teach a course on gender studies, specifically on the question of precarious labor for women in Latin America. I have also been excited to be a part of the Center for Research on Social Inequalities in this time. So it's great overall to be here with you and talk to you about what I have been doing. So for the last decade or so, I have been studying in an area around women's employment in domestic work, in paid domestic work. This is a very big issue in Latin America, as is in much of the world, but Latin America has the second largest population of paid domestic workers in the world. It's a job that is highly feminized for historical reasons. It's work that is highly precaritized, largely an informality, and it's work that's also highly racialized. So I have been doing this work for a long time to try to understand to what degree women's rights in this area are applied. Latin America has made a great deal of progress, I would say, over the last 20 years through a series of national legislations and also through the ratification of international jurisprudence around the rights of these workers. So this is an important time to be looking at this question. But what I have found in my research is that the laws have been passed, which is clearly a victory for union leadership and for activism. But at the same time, because of the history associated to this work and because of weak states, the laws are not being applied appropriately. And so we may have the law on one hand, but we don't really have workers with the full gamut of rights. So this is what my research has entailed. Indeed, it is a lot of what we discussed in my course this semester. They're talking about domestic workers, but also other precarious forms of work for women in the region. So in a nutshell, that is what I have done. I could add to that a growing interest in the care economy. In Latin America, there is a great interest now in developing what are known as care systems, apart from healthcare, apart from Social Security, but care systems that recognize the work that people do in the service of the care of children and in the care of older adults or dependent adults. And so I'm also following those trends to see how well they are implemented, what things we can learn from them, not only for Latin America, but for other parts of the world. Well, there are many motivations to join this program. First of all, there is a program on gender studies, and it allows me to be in a community of people who are teaching on this subject. I teach from the vantage point of precarious labor, but certainly there are people that are teaching from the vantage point of gendered violence, of the care economy, or different ways of looking at care, of looking at different types of marginalizations of people on the basis of their gender and so forth. So it's allowed me the opportunity to be a part of a larger research and teaching community. And it's also given me the opportunity to be the professor in a fantastic classroom. You know, as professors, we often think that we are the ones teaching, but I think that most of the time we are learning from those students. It's a give and take in that classroom. So it's been wonderful. And of course, Sciences Po is an excellent institution. It has offered a number of different resources. As the Center for Research on Social Inequalities, which I've mentioned, I've been able to be a part of that research community. There is a lot of research here at the university that is going on in terms of gender studies. So it's allowed me a vantage point to see different kinds of work, both in the qualitative and in the quantitative sense. So overall, it's been a fabulous opportunity to be here at Sciences Po in Paris with our students, with the research community. And yes, so I've been very pleased to be here. Well, of course, I've been teaching, but outside of my teaching, something that's been very important is finalizing a book that is going to be published next year by Temple University Press in the United States. And it's a book that is about the relationship between women, social reproduction, and domestic work, trying to link together, as I mentioned before, this decade worth of research, understanding what is the linkage between this very precarious labor that primarily women do and all women, because in the end, all women all over the world, in Latin America especially, but all over the world, women are still very much attached to everything that is regarded as domestic or care. So I'm trying in my book to untangle that relationship and present an argument, perhaps, for how we might do better, how it is that women in the end become full political, equal beings when we detach ourselves from the domestic and from care. So that's it. So this semester I taught a course here called Gendered Inequality in Latin America and Emerging Responses. And as I mentioned before, this research is sort of primarily based really on my research of the last 10 years. But what the course does is take the students on a journey, right? And so we begin with the question of how gender has impacted their lives, what they know, what they think about gender. We continue with a little bit of history on women's placement in Latin America, and it invites them to think about how that is similar or different from their own countries, which is actually very interesting in the class that I had, because I had a very international class, so the responses may not exactly be the same for every person. We look at the political and state structure of states in Latin America. We look and spend a lot of time on the question of women's inequality in work, and that means informal employment. We look very deeply at paid domestic work, because paid domestic work is nearly 20% of the work that women do in Latin America, so this is also highly relevant. The students do a project with their families. They do a life histories project to understand how domestic and care work has evolved in their family over 2 generations, so that was exciting. And we close the course with a discussion on where we are now. And Latin America is at a point where there are different countries that are actually looking at care systems and how that may or may not evolve, what it needs, and we look at this in comparative perspective. So that is what the course has been about. I hope my students have learned. As I've said, I always learn from them, but I think I would be satisfied knowing that my students have perhaps thought about gender, and particularly how gender affects their particular lives, and how it will affect their lives, and what kinds of changes they would like to see for themselves that perhaps their parents or their grandparents' generation didn't have. So I really hope that it leaves my students with a longer reflection than just that we experienced together throughout these 12 weeks. The masterclass was called So Close and Yet So Far: Social Reproduction, Women, and Citizenship in Latin America. And this class, which I prepared for students at Sciences Po and Université Paris Cité, was really an exciting moment to talk to a broader audience of students, of course, at Sciences Po, both undergraduate and graduate students, but also at Université Paris Cité. And the lecture was based on my research, mostly, really trying to construct the arguments that I had proposed in the book and some of the reflections that I've had over the years. And as the title suggests, So Close and Yet So Far, what I'm trying to show in this lecture is how women, clearly as a gender, are connected, but how in reality, in our times, even more than differences with men, the differences exist among women, and how in our world, and in Latin America certainly, women's ability to step out to work, to be independent beings, really ends up relying on another woman of lesser means. So much of this lecture and much of my work in the book that I will be publishing next year is about really opening up that argument. This has been something that's been discussed among scholars, feminist scholars and others for a long time, but it's really this vantage point that I wanted to bring to the fore at this lecture, and it was really great to have an opportunity to not only talk, but also to listen to the students' reactions to their experiences in their own countries, and to entertain a number of very interesting questions. So it was a lovely and very much a learning experience for me as well. So being at a place like Sciences Po for a semester and being able to teach a course that's based on one's research and then talking to an audience of undergraduate and graduate students about the same has been extremely enlightening and important. I think we take for granted what we think we know sometimes, and sometimes it requires coming to a new space with new people to really have a time for reflection. And this period at Sciences Po has allowed me that. It's allowed me to hone many of the ideas that I had, streamline some of the arguments that I was making, think together with other people, including my students. So that has been in and of itself an incredibly important opportunity, and I feel that I walk away from it refreshed, I think clearer in my thinking and in my arguments, so that's been a great privilege. Plans for the future, I've had the opportunity to meet a number of different people, both researchers and professors that are part of the same program as I am here, and other people at CRIS and in other research centers. And so likewise, they have given me great food for thought and thinking for future projects. There are things that I thought I knew about care, and there are new angles, for example, in care work and care, the ethics of care, that I have learned while I was here because of researchers doing work here also. So it's possible that we will come together for different projects in the future, either here in France or in the home countries of their home countries or my home country or somewhere in the world, but that is a possibility going forward. And so I look forward to that.